Hey, welcome back, everyone. We're sitting here with Mary Miller, Congresswoman-elect of the Illinois 15. Mary, it's a real pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much. This is my second year to be here, and it's quite a privilege, yes.
Yeah. And so we're sitting here again at the Student Action Summit at Turning Point USA, and Mary, she's here with her daughters. Mary, you were talking about how Trump has changed the culture in America when it comes especially to student activism and so on. Can you tell us about this?
Well, I think President Trump has inspired people to get off the sidelines and get involved. And for myself, I'm a farmer, educator, mom of 7, grandma of 17, and I have to say that this freshman class is a diverse class of people that have been what I would call everyday people involved in agriculture, medicine, pharmacy, and small business. And they love our country like President Trump does, and we're looking for solutions, not socialism.
Now, Mary, in terms of this cultural shift we've seen in the country, one of the big narratives is, of course, self-reliance, this battle between really freedom and socialism, right? Self-reliance or socialism, as you mentioned. And also, this movement feels like it's under assault right now, that the future is uncertain. What are your thoughts about the kind of the way this dynamic in the country right now, where we could go?
Well, I think that whoever controls the information is going to control the people, and I think that we need to, like I say, not sit on the sidelines and not be silent, and also not be angry-spirited. So our ideas as conservatives are better. They promote production, creativity, stable family life and social life. So I think we need to be on the march, and we need to effectively communicate, especially with young people.
And of course, you said you have 17 grandchildren. How are you educating them with these values? Because, you know, one of the big concerns, we actually, for Epoch Times, we get letters all the time. People are concerned about public schools and the way that kids are being indoctrinated. They feel their kids are being indoctrinated. What do you feel the solution is for this? What can be done about it?
Well, I think President Trump, I call him our courageous president. And I think the fact that he called out public schools that are failing, and he said that those children should be allowed to go to other schools, to try something else. And so I'm for school choice. I'm for excellent public schools. But I think the fact that people can leave and have choices will cause the school system to improve. And I also think that schools should represent the values of the communities where they are. So I oppose a top-down agenda to educate our children. And I think state and local governments and local school boards should be in charge. And like I say, reflecting the values of the community and the families.
Now, Mary, I guess just closing thoughts. If you were to tell people one thing about what this country needs most, what would you tell them?
I think we need hope. And our children are the hope of our country. So this Turning Point USA Student Action Summit, I would say everybody, get your children, grandchildren, neighbor kids, let them know about it, let them listen to the podcast, and find a chapter to get involved.
Wonderful. Mary Miller, real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hey, folks, we're sitting here with Mark Szuszkiewicz. He ran for the New York State Assembly, and he's alleging, or concerned at least, that there was some forms of election fraud. And he's calling now for investigations into this. Mark, real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Now, of course, you're talking about possible election fraud. What evidence have you seen in New York around this?
Well, during the primary election, Governor Cuomo allowed ballots to be cured, and I personally knocked on doors, and some people said that the person hasn't lived there in 15 to 17 years. I had another person over the phone that one of my volunteers called, and he said that person isn't alive anymore, but he had power of attorney, so he voted for them, as if that's okay. Now, those are only a couple of instances. I was ahead by 9% on election night, with approximately a little over 5,000 absentee ballots, and then more and more kept coming in. The fact that they were allowed to be postmarked on Election Day, some of them were received afterwards, some of them were stamped after Election Day, and they were still included there without a poll side stamp. So there's a lot of different details on there that are shady. And in order to do a proper investigation, I need information from the Board of Elections, which I requested 3.5 weeks ago, and I still haven't been able to get.
So the Board of Elections in New York is not cooperating with these calls from you.
So far, I mean, I'm emailing, and I guess it's a very crazy time, so maybe it's just an oversight on their part, or maybe they're just hoping that I give up. But whether or not there was enough to overturn the election, that's not the point. It needs to be investigated, and we need to find, even if there were 100 instances of voter fraud, people need to be prosecuted for this to deter them from doing it in the future. And another thing, what I feel, that it should be election day, and traditionally it was election day, not election month, not election winter, or whatever the case may be, because this is dragging on the presidential election for so long, and it's not fair to the candidates, like myself, who thought they won and it's overturned several weeks later. It's not fair to the people of the country watching what's happening with President Trump and uncertainty of who their president is going to be. It needs to be that the ballots are all received before Election Day, and that way, when the polls close on election night, there's no mysterious ballots just happen to show up after the polls close.
Now, this is one of the big concerns people had with the recent elections. Of course, we've seen the evidence of fraud taking place in the presidential election, but of course, it wasn't just the presidential election we just went through. There were many other offices voted on, and a lot of people are saying, okay, we can, of course, investigate the presidential elections, but what about all the rest of them? What do you say to that?
Well, that's the thing. Everyone's eyes are on the presidential election. Obviously, that's the most important election. So people at local offices like mine, it's not even really a concern. It's not on the public's radar as much. It's not like people care as much about it. So there's not as much outrage when all the focus is on the presidential election. And somebody like me that had a lot of great ideas to improve the community, which I put on my website, markforny.com. And those ideas I was working on, getting the funding for some of the education programs that I wanted to do right after election night. And then it turns out I'm not going to be able to accomplish any of those things because all these ballots mysteriously appeared.
Now, in terms of this election, of course, I mean, I worked as an investigative reporter in New York on previous elections and also found several anomalies with it. After this happened, did you hear of other cases like this happening in New York? Did you hear any other information coming up from other people in the political community on this?
Well, not in New York City, but there was in New York State. There was a congressional election where the Republican candidate won by double-digit votes. I don't know if it was 50 or whatever the case may be, and more ballots just mysteriously appeared out of nowhere after the tally was done. So it seems like it's happening a lot more than just my election in New York. And it's amazing that Trump did so well in New York as opposed to 2016, and none of the state offices switched. My running mate, Vito Bruno, for the state Senate race, our districts intersected. So I think a lot of what happened were ballots that were, if there were fraudulent ones, they were against him and against me on the same ballot. So we're both victims at the same time in those same ballots.
Now, if you were to tell people one thing in terms of what you faced on election night, you said, of course, that it looked like you won, and then new ballots showed up. We saw this happen also with the presidential race. If you were to tell people one thing, what would it be?
Fight to make sure that the elections all the ballots are arrived and accounted for on election day, not just the month of November. That way we at least have some uncertainty and there's no ballots coming in after election day.
Hey, Mark, thanks again for being on Crossroads.
Thank you. It was great being here.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. We're sitting here with Alex Clark, host of Politics, and you're talking about how you've reached out to really bridging the gap with younger generations, especially young girls, getting them involved in politics and pulling the propaganda out of the whole political discussion. Hey, it's a real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. I have had such a blast creating Politics because, yes, we are reaching a over 75% female audience, and really, here's the thing. You can be conservative and want to keep up with the Kardashians too, okay? It's a myth that we are totally deficient in pop culture, and it has been so fun. It's a very pink very exciting, bright show. And it's like if E! News and Fox News had a baby, is kind of what I call politics. And we post on Instagram TV every single weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And, it's just amazing because it is a really gentle, I call it cotton candy conservatism. It's a gentle way to reach out to people that would otherwise say that they're on the left or apolitical, because everyone, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, you're consuming pop culture. And so, they may not want to sit there and talk about the election, but if I say, oh, do you want to talk about what Kylie Jenner did today? All of a sudden they're interested. And then I can kind of give my conservative perspective, based on whatever the news is that day.
This is an interesting perspective because I think really before Trump, the conservative movement was kind of dry. It was kind of boring, and it was perceived as kind of old and dusty and not very attractive, especially for younger people. I guess, how do you see this dynamic changing now? Because you see, look at this event we're at, the Student Action Summit here at Turning Point. You see a lot of energy, a lot of real youth, a lot of real vitalization with it, right?
Oh, yeah. We had over 50% more applicants this year than last year. And unfortunately, we have, restrictions because of the lockdowns and COVID, of course, which we're abiding by. But also then you have, so many kids that couldn't get in that wanted to. That tells us these kids are dying to be around other conservative students. They don't want to feel alone. They want out of their rooms, out of their dorm rooms, and they're wanting to feel like they're not the only one. So that's why Turning Point events are so important. But, I think you're absolutely right when you say that Trump made this possible. President Trump, and I told him this when I met him, is the pop culture president. This is a reality TV star. The hip hop community loved him before he was president. They were rapping about going to Mar-a-Lago. So that's a huge thing. He's a cultural icon that everyone loved. He was in Home Alone too. You know what I mean? So everybody loves him, and it is because of him that I think that a show like Politics is possible. And going forward, I hope that conservatives will take advantage of that and start getting more into producing TV shows, movies, and getting more in entertainment, because using entertainment as a vessel to teach people about conservative ideas, sometimes people are conservative, they just have never been exposed to conservative ideas, so they don't even realize it. And a lot of ways to get them to understand that is through pop culture. So we need to be even more involved than we are.
One thing I've been seeing too, talking to some of the younger kids here, like college kids, one thing a lot of them go through is they're in school, they're being told that, that they have to be guilty because of the color of their skin. They're being taught all these, weird, politically correct dynamics, and they feel oppressed by these systems allegedly trying to fight oppression. And, one thing when I was in school, of course, it was kind of cool to rebel, and it's become kind of rebelling is now the conservative thing to do. Is this what you're seeing as well?
Oh, 100%. Conservatism is the new punk rock. It is cooler to go against the man, which would be the left. And my speech, I talk on Tuesday this weekend at the Turning Point USA Student Action Summit, and my whole speech is about how the left is just like a cult. And, one of the things that they do is they're the ones that want to strip you away from your freedom and tell you that you're so oppressed and stuff, when they're actually creating the very oppressive rules and policies and all these different things. It's like, your cult leader is saying oh, don't go out there, everybody's bad, but they're really, the ones that are propagating all this stuff. So that's important. I think when students realize that, especially, and when they get off campus and they're out in the real world after they graduate, that's a lot of times when they become conservative. You have a wake-up call, at that moment when you're in the real world.
Well, that's an interesting idea. You said you're going to be speaking later on in this event about how the left, the new left, I should say, has become like a cult. And I've seen people talk about this before, that especially, for example, it's almost like you are deemed bad based on your gender, based on your skin color, based on your class, and so on. And the only way you can have a voice, because if you try to give your opinion, they say, oh, quit spreading your privilege. The only way you can have a voice is if you find a way to be deemed oppressed in some way. And so people try to look for this way to have a voice. And that's a lot of times why they get involved to really extreme extents in these movements. Is this what you're talking about, or are you observing other elements of this?
Oh, no, that's exactly going to be part of the speech. The singer Lizzo this last week, she kind of has made her entire brand about self-love and embracing that she is a super curvy plus-size person and all this stuff. And the left loved that about her. Well, last week, she drank a weight loss smoothie. And everybody on the left said that they felt heartbroken, they felt disappointed, all these different things, because Lizzo is saying, wait a minute, maybe I do want to like take a step in the right direction and being a little bit healthier, because they see the victimhood. There is strength in being a victim. That's what they try to tell these kids when they're not victims at all. And so I think hopefully my speech is going to wake some people up to those realities, and I kind of talk about that Lizzo story in there as well. But you know, it is like a lot of these kids, you see them kind of gravitate towards the left, especially like the trans movement, because they do feel like an outsider in their peer group. They want somewhere to belong. The left has historically done a better job than conservatives at reaching out to these disenfranchised people and giving them a club and a space to belong. But I am changing that with politics. I call all the girls that are fans of my show cute conservatives, and it has become a massive movement. There's meetups all over the United States. I can't keep merch in stock. They keep selling out of my merch. So that has become such an exciting thing, is giving these girls another space to counter what the left offers, but that there's not strength in being a victim. There is strength in being a victor.
And I noticed too, you don't shy away from embracing feminine virtues. And I think that's, I actually, when I was in school, I wrote a paper about this, and I actually passed somehow. But I argue that the modern feminist movement is anti-feminine because it tells girls they have to act like men to be accepted. You seem to embrace this, though, and really you seem to be kind of, they're resonating with you on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the feminist movement is not about making women any more equal to men. It's about totally erasing men completely. And you know, they say you can't be a feminist if you're not pro-choice. You can't be a feminist if you want to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom. That's not true feminism. If we're going to talk about like empowering women and treating all women as equal, then every single avenue that a woman chooses to do with her life should be accepted. But that's not what we're seeing with them, because it's not about actually being equal to men or equality. Because guess what? In the United States of America, women are equal to men. There's not a right that you have that I don't have. And so they have to find something else to gravitate towards. That's why you're seeing like the Women's March talking about things like no human being is illegal, open borders. We want gun control. We want, universal health care and access to abortion for everybody free. It's because it's an arm of the Democrat Party. It has nothing to do with people being equal. They have nothing to, there's not, because we are equal now. So that movement, they have nothing to keep them alive. So they have to find other ways to make people feel like victims and, keep them scared and keep them coming to their events and voting the way they want them to vote.
And, back on this point of this whole kind of cult-like behavior of this, far left, which has unfortunately become kind of the overwhelming voice of the left in general because they're the loudest. Why do you see kids being pushed away by that? Because I think we're increasingly starting to see that.
I think that they start to feel, for lack of a better term, it starts to make them feel really yucky. What is fun about being like depressed all the time and sullen and like the world is going to end? You had these kids on campuses, with coronavirus, by the way, which has a over 99% survival rate for people. I had it. I survived. It was like a cold, okay? I'm not saying that some people don't have worse symptoms than others, but it isn't a death sentence for every single person that gets it, and we shouldn't treat society like that. We still need to live our lives and go on and have the freedom to make choices for ourselves. And I think kids, that's a depressing state to live in all the time, and that's how they are. And some of them, it wakes them up, because conservatives, we are so much happier. Our relationships are better, like marriages are better in conservative relationships. You know what I mean? Like, we just are happier people. If you have a conversation with a leftist versus a conservative, I think we do seem like we have a lot more joy in our hearts. I think that's appealing to people.
Now, Alex, I guess just in terms of what you stand for, what you're trying to accomplish, if you really people with one message, what would it be?
I would say that the stereotype that we've been told of what a conservative is, Turning Point USA events, especially SAS, the conservatives that watch my show Politics, we've proven that that is a lie. A conservative is anyone. It's any color, it's any sexual orientation, it's any gender. There's no rule to what you have to be a conservative, and we are way more of an open and accepting movement, a political movement, than the left, always.
Great. Hey, Alex, real pleasure having the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey folks, we're here with Todd Coconato, director of the Religious Liberty Coalition. We're talking today about religious freedom in the United States. Hey Todd, it's great having you on Crossroads.
It's great to be here. First of all, we appreciate the work that you're doing out there. You're one of the only news sources that's really speaking truth, and people are noticing this all around the country, so thank you.
I appreciate it as well, yeah. So, In terms of what's happening in the United States, churches are being shut down. They're being told they can't gather for worship. People are being fined. Where do you see this heading right now? What is the current situation in the country right now with this?
It is scary. You know, when I first started in this position, it was not like this. And, you know, this is America. This is the United States. We never thought we'd be seeing pastors being thrown in jail, pastors being fined $5,000 for having a service out in California. I mean, it's unbelievable. In fact, some of those pastors are here today. But, you know, what we're seeing right now is an infringement on the First Amendment. And it's scary. We need to stand up and we need to push back.
Well, you know, this is one of the big things a lot of Americans are concerned about. I mean, the end of religious liberty, to an extent right now, is a serious thing in itself, but also the disregard for the Constitution being the basis of what our government is built upon. And if we lose both of these, I think the question is, what are we as a nation? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's exactly the point, is the Constitution is one of the most perfect documents. I mean, it's not the Bible, but it's pretty darn close to being, you know, one of the best documents in history, and that's what's made America so great, and that's what the globalists and the deep state and the people want to take away, is our freedoms and our rights. And a lot of people haven't been paying attention, unfortunately, Josh, until recently, but now they're starting to wake up. And so, you know, the work that you're doing at the Epoch Times and, you know, the different things that we're seeing where truth seekers are coming out and speaking, thank God, but, you know, it's like the 11 o'clock hour. So we need to understand that if a Biden presidency happens, religious liberty are going to be one of the core things that he's going after. And, you know, the Equality Act is one of the things that he wants to push through right away. Now, you know, we're all for equality and all those things, but the thing is this, is it takes away a pastor's right and ability to preach the full gospel in the Bible. And that infringes, as you said, on our constitutional right, our First Amendment right. You know, freedom of speech. Come on, we don't have freedom of speech. We have to be censored now. And as you've experienced and I've experienced, that's what's happening, is there's censorship here in the United States. And so that's why we have the coalition, is to bring in pastors, like-minded individuals that can stand together, stand for the Constitution, and push back against what really is tyranny.
You mentioned you're worried about Biden becoming president because of this new Equality Act. I guess, you know, some people would say, oh, can't Trump, you know, just come in maybe 4 more years? Can't this thing turn around? Where do you think the country's heading, if that, you know, in terms of where we're going?
Yeah, well, that is the question, isn't it? I think that the president is still in this. He's a fighter. I know personally from people that I've spoken to that are very close to him, he's going to fight all the way through, and I believe that. And what I really feel like we need to do right now, I know some people are throwing out, this is kind of like a 1776 moment of our generation, but I believe we need to fast, pray. If you're a person of faith, pray. You know, get on your knees with your family and really pray this through all the way till the end, because I believe that God is a God of miracles, and I believe that we can see a second term of President Trump. I'm standing in faith believing that.
Now, I know a lot of religious people specifically have talked about this as a battle between good and evil. It's been framed as a battle of light and darkness. Would you agree with this? What are your thoughts?
100%. I mean, that's what, you know, people say, Pastor, you're getting too political, you know, I say it's really nothing to do with politics. This is a battle between light versus darkness. Joe Biden had it right. He said it's for the soul of this country. And that's what we're fighting for, is for the soul. Are we going to stand with the Constitution? Are we going to stand for the freedoms and rights that we've enjoyed as Americans for, you know, our entire existence as a nation? I know we have a checkered past, but America is still the greatest country in the world. I've traveled all around the world. I've seen different countries, even in the Western world. Why are people out trying to come to the United States? Well, that's because they know they have opportunity. They have freedom here. You can still start a business. You can practice your faith freely. We don't want these rights to go away, because once you lose them, that's it. You don't get them back. And that's why there's people in Hong Kong right now that are fighting for President Trump, because they know what it means, not just for our United States, but for the whole world.
Now, Todd, I guess just in terms of what you're working on, what brings you here, if you're leading people with one message, what would it be?
The message is that we need to stand. Turn off the mainstream corporate media that's pretty much 90% owned by 6 corporations. Listen to outlets like the Epoch Times. Listen to those that are telling the truth. Ask God for wisdom and discernment, and trust what God is speaking to you. Don't listen to the fake news, because unfortunately, I hate to say it, but they're propaganda. And that's why God is prospering the Epoch Times and others like you that are standing for truth, is because people know inside that there's something inherently wrong that's happening right now. And this is a very precipice moment for our nation. Either we stand up now, or we could very well lose these freedoms for the rest of our life. And we don't want to do that.
Hey, Todd, a real pleasure having you on Crossroads. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Hey, folks, we're sitting here with Isabel Brown. She's a contributor to Turning Point USA. And again, we're at the Student Action Summit. Hey, Isabel, it's a real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So I understand you're also a scientist. This is interesting. And of course, we're sitting here at this conference, one of the first ones I've been to since the virus outbreak. Now, in terms of these lockdowns everyone's talking about, do you think they're viable based on your scientific background? What do you say to this?
Absolutely not, and it's really disheartening to see the scientific community continue to be squashed with their voices in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. I got started in my academic journey being pre-med. My dream was to be a trauma surgeon, and while obviously I went in a bit of a different direction, I recently completed my master's degree at Georgetown University in biomedical sciences, policy, and advocacy, which is a very long name for essentially how we handle public health crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. Learning about a pandemic in the midst of one happening was so eye-opening because I was told by every expert under the sun in global health policy that we've never done mass lockdowns. They don't work. They actually spread viruses faster. We have so much data to back this up. And seeing China start to make that decision in January, all of my professors condemned that behavior, yet didn't speak up when we were doing it here in the United States because it wasn't politically correct. I think the scientific community really has a lot to say about COVID-19 and reopening not only our country, but the entire world for business and getting back to in-person events just like this one. But unfortunately, that's really being squashed on the internet, on social media, and in every other way to tell that truth.
You know, one point I've made, of course, I've been covering it since the get-go, the model of lockdowns and mask mandates, this is the China model. And the validity of it was based on disinformation spread by the Chinese Communist Party, repeated through the WHO, and different states adopted it. It's interesting now you're saying that according to the medical community, they said this is unhealthy. Why is this then being promoted by the medical community?
Ultimately, I think that unfortunately most of the decisions being made related to the COVID-19 pandemic are political ones, not scientific ones. And unfortunately, we don't have enough scientists involved in public policy to drive better policy in a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There are thousands of doctors and infectious disease experts starting to speak out against lockdowns in public ways as much as they can. But again, unfortunately, I think that information is limited from being spread on the internet and social media especially. For those watching who may not have heard of the Great Barrington Declaration, that's a great resource to check out. Thousands and thousands of leading experts in infectious disease from across the world are urging government officials to reopen our world because we're actually causing more health problems than we're solving with these continued lockdowns. People aren't getting screened for cardiovascular disease or cancer. We're seeing spikes in substance abuse and mental health disorders as well.
So you've gone from being a medical student to being with Turning Point. What was the reason for this? What's the jump here?
When I first got involved on my college campus outside of the classroom and extracurriculars and even in my classes like organic chemistry and physics and anatomy, I all of a sudden found that my professor's political ideology was driving much more of my curriculum than objective truth, which was why I chose to pursue science as my degree to begin with, given that I love the truth. I love finding black and white answers in this world full of gray. But instead, we would be talking about a southern border wall or who my professors voted for in the 2016 election instead of how many numbers of genders there are. Spoiler alert, it's 2 genders, by the way. I learned that in science class. So I really found myself being pulled in a direction to advocate not only for conservative ideas on my campus at Colorado State University, but also just for objective truth, because I found that there was such a direct assault on truth in this world of lunacy that we see from the left on college campuses. So when I was a student, I started a Turning Point USA chapter at my school, and my journey in the conservative movement really took off from there. I've been very fortunate to be brought on to our public relations side of things after graduation, and I'm really excited to see what happens next.
Now, you touched on some interesting things, and it's the school system, it's the education, it's the sciences, and it's medicine now falling into politics. And people are worried right now that politics are being taken over public health. What would you tell these people who have this concern?
It's not even a concern at this point. It's actually what's unfolding right before our eyes, and that's incredibly disheartening to see because all of a sudden everything has to do with what is considered the politically correct flavor of the day rather than what is objective truth. We've seen that sliding scale start to take place within the last few years in the medical and scientific community with unlimited numbers of genders and abortion not killing a unique human being with a unique set of DNA. But now we're seeing public health be the excuse for tyranny when it comes to extreme policies and regulations being set at the local, state, and federal levels. I'm incredibly concerned for a potential Biden presidency that's not operating in scientific evidence or data, but instead in what's politically correct when it comes to mask mandates, business closures, and lockdowns.
Well, you hit an important point there because what a lot of people argue when they post online is that they believe in science, not politics, when arguing for the Biden stance on this. But oftentimes people in the scientific community, we've seen posts, for example, videos where doctors come out and speak about it and they get silenced. So where is the science on this? What's your take?
I think science really, unfortunately, is being driven by politics nowadays, not the other way around. And unfortunately, objective truth is being decided at the beginning of something happening rather than letting the evidence and data speak for itself. You know, we all learned the scientific method when we were in grade school and then again in middle school and again in high school, where you set a hypothesis, but then you do all the research to determine whether or not that's true. Today, even in the scientific community, especially in academia on college campuses, you're seeing the predetermined conclusion being decided at the beginning and then fitting all of the evidence and data in to make sure that that conclusion is what you end up with. That's exactly what we're seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic, with this vaccine rollout, and it's incredibly disheartening that physicians who do dare to speak the truth and speak out against this political correctness are unfortunately silenced almost overnight, as we saw with Twitter scrubbing all footage of the White Coat Summit a few months ago with those frontline doctors of America. Kudos to them, and I really hope more scientists continue to speak out in truth.
Now, a lot of people, they don't speak out because they're worried about being censored, they're worried about being attacked, they're worried that these attacks may even affect their employment. Given this situation, what would you tell people? Just one last message, what would you tell people?
Don't be afraid. I tell it to our students all the time. I frequently travel the country to speak to our students on their college campuses. And the left is very, very effective culturally. They have been for the last few years, but especially in 2020 at making people afraid, whether that's in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic or speaking up for their values. Instantly, you'll be labeled as every horrible name under the book: white supremacist, racist, anti-woman, transphobic, all of which I've been called a million times, for daring to speak out not just for conservative ideas, but anything remotely against what the left is advocating for. They're only successful in doing that if we let them be, and if we continue to be silent and roll over when that name calling continues to happen. If we get up over and over and over again in our jobs, in the halls of Congress, on our college campuses, and just doing what we do best, living everyday life, that's when we're going to start to see a cultural difference in this country.
Thanks again for being on Crossroads.
Thank you so much.